Welcome to another episode, everyone. Why did I turn from a Hoover Crip to a Hoover criminal? The question has been asked time and time again. In fact, some folks have asked, why did the Hoovers turn from Hoover Crip to Hoover criminal? Now, I cannot speak for the Hoovers, for all of the Hoovers, for every Hoover. My goal would be to speak for myself and myself only. Everyone has their own story. You would have to ask them why they went from Hoover Crip to Hoover criminal. However, it is inevitable that I'm going to make some generalizations here, because the reason that I went from Crip to criminal is essentially the same reason that my whole gang went from Hoover Crip to Hoover criminal. You can't really separate the two. I can't say, well, I went for this reason and they all went for that reason. It's pretty much all the same reason at the end of the day. But again, others have their own story, and I'll let them tell it. Now, the bigger question probably would be, why did I start gang banging to begin with? Because perhaps I can save someone's life when I talk about that. And since I'm going to talk about this soon, I'm going to get into that as well. Why did I start gang banging from the beginning? Why was I a Crip to even turn criminal? I'm starting off right now already being a Crip, telling this story. And I would like to get into, if anything, why I became a Crip to begin with. Again, perhaps someone can take heed to my story and change the trajectory of their life. Now, in 1989, the Hoovers, essentially, yes, went from Hoover Crip to Hoover criminal. Now, I started banging in 1986. I was 12 years old. I'd already been shot with a 12 gauge. I was fully into the street already at a young age. I was mature for my age. So fast forward to 1989, 3 years later, I'm 15 years old. I'm not going to get into the politics of it all as far as, was it one individual that called this shot for all of the Hoovers? Was it one individual powerful enough to say, we're going from Hoover Crip to Hoover criminal? Was it a certain section, the 7 folds, the 8 trays, the 11 deuces, that came up with this idea and brought it to the rest of the Hoover section and everyone just agreed? Was it the OGs that got together and said, man, this is what it's going to be from now on? Let's put this out there. I'm not going to get into it all. Did we take a vote and say, who all agree to this? That's neither here nor there, and that's politics that I won't get into as far as the Hoovers are concerned. Again, I can only speak for myself. And so I'll just say that I was full-fledged a Crip. I was fully involved in it. I wore blue every day. I wore blue rags on my head. I was gangstered. I was cripped out. I had lokes on. I said cuz every other word. I was fully involved into the Crip culture, as were all of the Hoovers at this time. We were Crips, and we were representing it to the fullest. Now, it just came to be, as I said, I won't get into how it came to be, that in 1989, the decision was made, man, we're going to go from Crip to criminal. Now, the reason that the decision was made is self-evident. It's common sense. Common sense dictates to you why this decision was made. Because, well, I'll say it anyway, because the Crips, for the most part, were the enemies of the Hoovers. When I think back on it and think about the beefs that the Hoovers were having at that juncture, as far as the Bloods were concerned, it was really just the Denver Lane Bloods that the Hoovers were really getting into, particularly the 11 Deuce Hoovers and 107 Hoovers that were right there in the area with the Denver Lane Bloods. But other than that, it was just Crips that the Hoovers were having wars with, fighting and killing one another. It was the Crips and the Hoover Crips. And the Hoovers are just saying, well, damn, all of the Crips hate us. Now, I can get into, and I will, let's open it up. as to why these Crip gangs hate the Hoovers so much. What role did the Hoovers play in the formation of the LA gang culture? Were some of these gangs Hoovers at first? Why have they turned on the Hoovers? Why do they hate the Hoovers so much? Is the Hoovers really a big brother? Are y'all the little bros? Y'all the little brothers. The Hoovers been around from the beginning and really started most of this shit. And this is why they now hate the Hoovers. We'll get into it. But whatever the reason, the Hoovers were and are the most hated group in the country, in America. So it was brought to the table, since we belong to a group, a faction, a section, a community, the Crips, that hate us so much. Again, when I think about the beefs, I can only really think about the different lanes. Yes, we had beefs with other blood sets, but as far as active beef, shooting at each other, killing each other, beating up each other, it was the Hoovers in the different lanes. But then when you go to the Crip side, I can name 50 Crip sets that we were getting into it with, and that was coming through busing, and vice versa. And so eventually, yes, it was brought to the table. Well, since we do not get along with these individuals, since they hate us so much, why are we identifying with them? Why are we saying we're Crips? And they don't want us to be Crips. They're shooting at it. They hate us so much. Let's separate ourselves so that we can be identified as something else. When they speak about us, they're not speaking about the Crips. We're separate from them. We have our own gang, our own identity, our own entity. So why did I become a criminal as opposed to a Crip? Well, my gang did. My gang changes. Either that I fall in line with that, or I join another gang, or I stop gang banging. At the time, I'm 15 years old. I don't have an opinion on this. I don't have a say-so. I can't tell the homies, no, damn it, this is what it is. You know. Now, no. There were some Hoovers that were still saying cuz, that were still saying Crip. They couldn't help themselves. They had been Crips for the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Me, just 3 years at the time. But many had been Crips and had it tattooed on them, you know, etc. Wore blue every day. They were Cripped out. So this was a hard pill for them to swallow. You know, like, damn, what you mean we ain't Crips? No, this Crip, cuz, this Hoover Crip. What you mean? These dudes can't run us off a Crip, but it wasn't about running us off a Crip. It's just that, it's just like Officer Tatum, Myron Gaines, the Hodge twins, Anton Daniels, these type, Candace Owens, these type of individuals who are begging to be accepted by someone else, and these people continue to reject them. And it's like they're not getting a picture. Form your own group. Be happy with who you are. And so we said we're gonna be happy with who we are, and this is who we are now. And I became a criminal because my gang turned from Hoover Crip to Hoover criminal, and I wasn't going to go against that. I was still saying cuz for a while afterwards as well, because as I said, I was fully ingrained in the Crip culture. And so I was still saying cuz and somewhat being defiant to it all. Like, no, I'm still a Crip. What are you talking about? But then it began to dawn on me. It really began to make sense. Well, no. Damn, every problem I am having, it is with another Crip. Why would I identify with these individuals? They are my enemy. And they're going to be treated as such from now on. Just like they've been treating me. And so once I gathered the concept, I was fully on board. I've been on board ever since, and I'm still on board. I'm not a Crip, for the record. I would still identify as a Hoover criminal. Personally, I don't care about any of that shit anymore. My objective is to be done with gang banging, period. And for everyone to be done with gang banging as it relates to black men, because it's just genocide and self-destructive. So I'm not here to glorify any of it, but we're going to have to get into the particulars of why I became a gang member to begin with, and some of the things that I've been through as a gang member. And we'll also get into why the Hoovers are really so hated in Los Angeles, California. It's not really what some of you may think. Now, these people claim not to hate the Hoovers, and no one is sitting here thinking about the Hoovers. Y'all ain't nobody to hate and this and that. And y'all are not the most hated. But none of this is true. The Hoovers are indeed the most hated, and it is indeed a reason for it. Believe that. And we're going to get into it. I'm going to get into it. It is what it is. Now, as I said, I was trying to be done, and I am, with this gang-banging nonsense, the gang-banging type of content. I don't want to add any fuel to any fires. Nevertheless, if my objective, and it is to save the youth, to save some individuals from the path that I chose, then I'm going to have to be involved. I'm going to have to speak on what's going on in the gang-banging culture. I'm going to have to keep my ear to the street about what's going on in the gang-banging culture if I'm going to be trying to help the gang-banging culture to become better and to leave that life behind. I'm going to have to know what's going on, so I'm going to have to be involved. So I'm still involved to that degree, but I don't care about who's beefing with who, and I'm not trying to start any part. That's all nonsense to me. But I want the brothers to know that it's nonsense, and in order for them to know, I have to be involved and speak on some of these situations. But that's it. Went from Hoover Crip to Hoover Criminal, 1989. The reasoning essentially is because the Hoovers felt like we were the most hated. We were being unalived by Crips. You know, most of our beefs are with Crips, not even with the Bloods. They're with Crips. And so why would we continue to be one of them if they hate us so much? Let's form our own group. We have our own group, but I mean, we're going to be identified separate from the Crips for now on. The Phi Deuce Hoovers remain Hoover Crips. They remain HGC, as many of you know, Hoover Gangster Crips. They never turned Hoover Criminal. They were Hoover Gangster Crips to begin with, and they remained Hoover Gangster Crips throughout. The only Hoover set that has the gangster attached to their name would be the Phi Deuces, Hoover Gangster Crips. Everyone else was just Hoover Crip Gang, and then turned Hoover Criminal Gang. As many of you know, the 107s have recently went back to being Hoover Crips. That's a whole nother story. I can get into that as well. But that's it right there. That's why I went from Hoover Crip to Hoover Criminal. It's really not an explosive reason, an explosive story. My gang went from Hoover Crip to Hoover Criminal, and so I followed suit. I'm from that gang. My gang says, this is what it is. This is what we're doing. Then everyone from the gang says, okay, that's what it is. As I said, what am I supposed to do? Say, no, what are you talking about, OG homie? I'm 15 years old. No, hell no, cuz we stand Crip. Man, you been from Hoover for 3 years. You better sit your ass down somewhere before we bust your fucking head open. You don't run nothing. So I follow suit. This is what the G homies want. This is what the G homies are saying. This is what the gang is saying. I'm a soldier. This Hoover. This was Hoover Crip. Okay. This is what the gang's saying. This Hoover Criminal then. And that's it. And I understand why. And I support it. I supported it then and I still support it now. That's it. That's me. That's my personal thing. So that's why I went. That's why I turned. Because my gang turned and I turned with them. I wasn't defiant. I wasn't going to be the oddball out. Now, again, there are many individuals there's some individuals who still wanted to stay Crip. Of course, and as I said, some individuals still saying cuz and all that, like they couldn't get over the fact that they were not Crips anymore, or were not supposed to be claiming Crip anymore. Some of them just out of habit were still saying cuz, and some of them out of defiance was like, nah, man, it's still Crip. But everyone got on board for the most part. That's all it is, man. Stay safe and stay free, people.